So again, last week we talked about the Buddha teaching that mentioned that Vimbananda, he just uses analytical thinking, not his pure mind. That's why he keep asking, right? Um, for us too, right? Because our mind unstable, so most of the time um, uh, we don't have much time to sell it out, right? So that's why it's not easy to see a pure nature, true nature. The Buddha said, you have widened your knowledge by hearing, but have failed to get out of stream of transpiration completely. So you know the cause of your upset, yet when you find yourself in the presence of that cause, you fail to recognize it, lest your trustfulness remain incomplete. I will now do something to clear away your doubt and suspicions. So again, so most of the time, like us, too, we just widen our knowledge by hearing, by listening, by reading the sutra, but we're still here in the cycle of rebirth. So the Buddha say, well, I will I show you so that you can clear your doubt and suspicion. In Vietnamese or Chinese translation, this one is mentioned that the Buddha asked Vimbananda that you should pay attention attentively and reply to my question truthfully. And in this English conversion, English translation, they just made it short. Okay, yeah. Oh, this is my favorite part. Yeah, please.
The Buddha then ordered Rahula to ring the bell and asked Ananda, "Do you hear it?" Ananda and the others in the assembly replied that they did. When the bell was no more heard, the Buddha asked again, "Do you still hear it?" They all replied they did not. Rahula again rang the bell, and the Buddha asked, "Do you hear it?" They replied that they did. The Buddha then asked Ananda, "What do you mean by hearing and not hearing?" Ananda and the others replied, "If the bell is rung, we call it hearing. And when the sound and its echoes stop, we call it not hearing." So this is going to be part of an exchange, just the opening of it. And there's certainly more that's going to happen. So they can hear the sound of the bell when it's ringing. They don't hear the sound of the bell when it's not ringing. And the Buddha, the way that this is translated is the Buddha phrases the question, "What do you mean by hearing and not hearing?" And that would be in reference to the bell. Because I guess we could say, I hear nothing, or I hear the absence of the bell. Like, we could say we distinguish that, but the way they responded is, if the bell is rung, we call it hearing. And when the sound and its echoes stop, we call it not hearing. Because I guess we could also think like, okay, I'm hearing all the time, and a sound will come and go, and I'm still hearing that it's not there. And I'm hearing when it's present, I'm hearing when it's not there. So that part, we call it not hearing when the bell stops.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I would completely agree with them on the way it's described, but I'm curious to hear what the Buddha says next.
The last part, this part is explained clearly. The Buddha again ordered Rahula to ring the bell and ask Ananda, "Is there any sound?" Ananda and others replied that there was a sound of the bell. A little later, when it could no longer be heard, the Buddha asked again, "Is there any sound?" They all replied that there was none. Then Rahula rang the bell again, and the Buddha asked, "Is there any sound?" They all replied in affirmative. The Buddha then asked Ananda, "What do you mean by sound and no sound?" Ananda and others replied that if the bell was rung, there was sound, and when both sound and its echo stopped, this was called no sound. It's common sense, right? That's what we apply in our everyday conversation, right? Um, when you hit the table and you can ask me, "Do you hear the sound?" Of course, I would say yes. Later on, couple of minutes later on, if you ask me again, I would say no. I couldn't see anything. That's common conversation. Yeah. And that the last one, yeah, we could explain more clear. Yeah, please.
The Buddha said, "Why did you talk so wildly?" Ananda and the others asked, "What do you say that we talked wildly? Why do you say that we talked wildly?" The Buddha said, "When I asked you about hearing, you spoke of hearing, and when I asked you about sound, you spoke of it. So merely about hearing and sound, your answers were ambiguous. How could they not be called wild? Ananda, when both the sound and its echo ceased, you said that there was no hearing. If there really was no hearing, its nature would have died and would be like a withered log. When the bell was rung again, how did you hear it? Existence and non-existence concern only the sound, which may be present or not. But how can the nature of your hearing follow your discrimination to exist or not? If it really ceased, who then knew there was no sound?"
Hmm.
Yeah, so this distinction between hearing and the sound, that the hearing persists even when the sound is gone, that we can hear the sound is gone, and we don't need to exercise our like distinguish making mind in order for hearing to occur.
Hmm.
Like the distinguishing can happen about something that's heard, but the hearing is not dependent upon those distinctions. Like the sound of the bell will be there whether or not we think if it's nice or not nice or too loud or soft or whatever. And when it's done, the potential to hear remains, which also to me seems pretty like straightforward. I think most common people, without even learning much about Buddhism or philosophy, I think they'd recognize that and agree with that.
Yes, but in our daily conversation, people would not recognize that, would not say that, right? We
Yeah, they
just
wouldn't really refer to their hearing. Yeah, speaking casually.
sound. They refer to the sound, not the hearing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say while I'm talking to you, okay, we say, oh, yes, we have conversation. But let's say we just sit in silence. There's no conversation, there's no sound. Of course, in generation, there's still here and there. But most of the time, if we keep silent, there's no sound, no conversation. Yeah.
And earlier in the sutra, they talk about like if you stare up into the sky without blinking, or if they like how you could have kind of evidence of the seeing nature, the hearing nature arising as just like a whatever thing. Like if you just sit and listen, it's like you can hear something even in a completely quiet room. There's like it's just like the ear can ring. You can get a ringing noise in your ear. And so I think this kind of relates back to those passages as well.
But again, the common people would not say that, right? They would not say that, oh, I still have my hearing. Most of the time, we will say, oh, I hear the sound, or I don't hear the sound. I hear conversation, I don't hear conversation. So basically, most of us focus on the sound, not the hearing nature. That's what the problem. That's what the Buddha say here. Yeah. Therefore, Ananda, in your hearing, the sound may exist or not, but it does not mean that the sound, whether here or not, can cause your hearing to exist or not. In your delusion, you mistake the sound for your hearing, and so regard the permanent as a transient. You should not say that hearing has no nature when it exists apart from conditions of disturbance, stillness, obstruction, and clearance. So clear now, right? So but separate the sound and the hearing.
Mm-hmm.
Sound come and go. The hearing is still there all the times. That's what he mentioned about the hearing nature or the sin nature.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, please.
For instance, when a man sleeps soundly, if people pound rice, he may hear the beating of a drum or the ringing of a bell. So when asleep, he may find it strange that the bell is like the beating of a piece of wood or stone. But if he suddenly wakes up and hears the pestle, he will tell his family about his mistake when asleep. Ananda, does that man remember in his sleep the conditions of stillness, disturbance, clearance, and obstruction? Although his body rests, the nature of hearing is present.
Hmm.
Well, that's a good example. I think probably a lot of people have had this experience. I've definitely had this experience where in a dream, a different sound is a sound is represented as something different. Yeah. So without the need for um, the words here, but when he's asleep, he may find the wood, and not as then remember conditions. Yeah, so he doesn't remember or think about these conditions of stillness and disturbance and everything. There's no thought prior to the sound being perceived. It's like the thought is happening in response to the sound being perceived.
So probably we may have this kind of experience before. For example, like while were sleeping in the cold, it's too cold. That in our dreams, somehow we saw that we walk on the snow. You have that kind of dreams, or
Yes. Mm.
it's so hot that if we didn't have any kind of AC, so in our sleep we saw that we sit or stand nearby the stove, right? The
Mhm.
fireplace. So at that moment, we didn't have a kind of interaction or I mean that thinking, but because of our feeling, right? You can say that somehow according to Buddhist view, our feeling interact with the external conditions somehow create that type of illusion in our mind.
Mhm.
And of course, I think once in a while, or sometime, like in this case, the Buddha say that while he was asleep, so someone uh, uh, beat the drums, uh, but he's may think that's just the bell. Sometimes while we were sleeping, someone may knock a door, right? And we may think that, I mean, not think, but we saw in the dream there's someone pound on the table, or whichever making the noise. It's similar, right?
Mhm.
Mm. So it's clear that we have that type of nature, that type of touching nature. Through our ear, we call it hearing nature. Through our body, right? We see that our touching nature. Through our tongue, is tasting nature. To our eyes, we have that kind of see nature and so forth. Hmm. Even when your body persists and your life come to an end, how can this nature vanish? For since the time without beginning, all living beings have followed forms and sounds and pursue the flow of their thought without awakening to the pure, profound, and permanent nature. By straying from permanent and by full birth and death, they have been contaminated with the defilements and successful lives. If you only keep away from samsara and dwell in real permanence, your eternal light will appear, thereby causing your organs, sense data, consciousness, and mind to vanish simultaneously. The object of your thinking process are polluting those, and the feeling that arise from your consciousness are impurity. If both are kept away, your dumb eyes will appear pure and bright instantly. Why then cannot you realize the supreme Buddhi? So again, um, the Buddha say that the reason why we still revolt this nature in that cycle of rebirth because we just chase after the form, chase after the sound, chase after the smell and so forth. And but as soon as we recognize those nature, the hearing, seeing, tasting, and so forth, um, so we will have that type of Dharma eyes. Uh, so we can recognize the Supreme Buddhi. Yes, it's pure understandable. It's pure straightforward. But so many years I felt that, let's say, if we are constantly reminded by our teacher, by our good noble advisor, and so forth, it's easy for us to remember, oh yes, I have hearing nature when hear the sound. But most of the time, probably 99%, the people surround us, they have that kind of habitual patterns when we have conversation, like we mentioned recently. When we have conversation, when we're talking, yes, we hear the sound, we're talking. But when we remain silent, we just think that, oh, there's no hearing at all. Because most of the time we just based on the sound, based on the form to see, based on the sound to hear, based on the food to consume, not to recognize our here nature, test nature, and so forth. And
Mm-hmm.
it's be hard to remember. Is that right?
Hmm.
Is that right?
I think, yeah, I think like the application of it of not chasing after forms or pursuing ideas, concepts.
Mhm.
That part seems, yeah, and that's going to be that's the manifestation of not recognizing the nature from which it arises and identifying with the sense data as opposed to the sensing nature.
Mhm.
So I think in thinking about it, it's easy to consider. But yeah, in daily life, I don't tend to. I mean, even if there's a sound, I don't tend to think about my hearing nature. You
That's a,
know, I'm just, or I definitely don't think about the tasting nature. For instance, if I'm not tasting something,
mm,
it doesn't cross my mind at all.
that's the point.
But
Yeah.
easy to see that the potential's there if I think about it.
Mhm.
And yeah.
Only when we are reminded by um, the teacher or when we come across, let's say, this part of the sutra, we could remember, oh, yes, we have that type of nature. Here, nature is in nature. Otherwise, we get go with the flow. We go with the sound. We go to the forms.
Hmm.
But let's say, imagine that we live in a society, communities that people remind each other, hey, the sound come and go, hey, the form come and go, and so forth. Eventually, it's easy for us to remember, right? But most
Hmm.
no, that's not the way we function in now, especially modern age. And we chase after the form, new cars, new cell phone, iPhone, and so forth and so forth. That's why it's easy for us to get lost. Only when we do meditation, we can look back in our mind. Yeah, that's why we keep confused. Oh, sorry. Mm, yeah, please.
Okay. Main instruction on the three meditative studies of the one mind. Ananda said, World honored one, although the Tathagata has taught the second decisive point in the development of the mind, I think that if the man good at untying knots does not know how they came to be tied, he will be unable to undo them. In this assembly, I and those who need to study and learn more are in the same case. Since the time without beginning, we and our delusions have both been subject to birth and death, and although we have cultivated good qualities that have enabled us to widen our knowledge by hearing about it all, and so are called leavers of homes, we are like a person suffering from malaria, which recurs every other day. Will you take pity on us and save us from drowning? Will you tell us which of our bodies and minds are in a knot, and how to untie it so that all suffering beings can escape from samsara and avoid falling again into the three realms of existence?
Mm.
So, yeah, this is like you just said too, the malaria is a good example because there will be bouts of fever that they come and go with malaria. It may appear to be gone. And so, we read something or we meditate, we're reminded of that nature. And for a while, we aren't falling into habitual patterns of, seeking form. But then it's very kind of automatic to drift back into if we're not continually mindful to drift back into identifying with form and seeking it. So Ananda is asking for like the answer to how do we stop this so that we can stay clear minded.
Again, especially in the West, especially in this country, as we focus more on the form, right? How much wealth we have accumulate, what kind of position we may have and so forth. So not easy for common people to recognize. They can understand if they read this passage, right? They can understand the sense of that. This is not easy to apply it.
Yeah, I really like the paragraph higher where it says, as the Buddha said something like, so though you understand the cause of your problem, you don't recognize it when it's in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you're in the midst of it, like intellectually, because I have this experience. Okay, I can understand these things, but then I'm still, I don't always have that torch on. So I may be going about my day and just not even noticing that I'm being driven by some sort of attachment to an impermanent form that ultimately is not really going to, like the idea that it's going to create the sort of happiness is that I imagine is just not the case.
Mm-hmm.
And periodically though, I get that kind of ding to like be mindful of that and let it go. Um, so yeah, it's I think this is a good analogy with malaria. And
Yeah.
I understand the sentiment of wanting to like, okay, how do we finish it?
Mm-hmm. So we understand that, but sometimes let's say we go to the restaurant, right? We choose the dishes that in our favor, right? And we talk about, oh, okay, wow, these dishes, these foods are so delicious and so forth. That means most of the time we get attached to the taste, to the food, not the tasting nature.
Mm-hmm.
And also we get lost. Someone criticizes us, someone scores in the respectful way. Let's say the children, our children, somehow one day they so rude that they show their disrespectful attitude towards us, we be angry. If they say something, we mean that this is so offended. That's why we easy for us to be angry. That's why, like you say. we recognize we have like a knowledge, but when we face to reality, we get lost to the cycle. Unless we do a meditation every day, unless we are mindful of those things. Okay. After saying this, he and all the assembly prostrated themselves, shed bitter tears, and eagerly await the Buddha's supreme revelation. The Buddha took pity on Ananda and those in the assembly who still needed to study and learn, as well as on the future living beings, in order to enable them to solve the cause of their future appearance in the world as a teacher, and so become the eyes of wisdom to guide coming generations. It is then his shining golden who hand to touch another head and comfort him. So again, that show that the Buddha understand the problems, and he took pity not only on Ananda but everyone of us to expound the teaching. Yeah. Yeah.
Thereupon all Buddha lands in the 10 directions shook 6 times, and Tathagatas, countless as motes of dust, sent out from the tops of their hands radiant rays of light, which reached Jetavana to shine upon the Buddha's head. This had not been seen before by the assembly. Then Ananda and all those present heard countless Buddhas declare with one voice, "Excellent Ananda, if you want to know about the innate ignorance that causes you to transmigrate in samsara, you should know that the roots of your birth and death are your 6 sense organs. If you want to know about Supreme Bodhi, it is these 6 organs that will enable you speedily to realize happiness and liberation and permanence in nirvana."
Mm.
So, yeah, after the Buddha comforted Ananda by touching his head, all the Buddha lands in the 10 directions shook. And then limitless Buddhas sent light from their hands to shine on the Buddha's head. And no one in the assembly had seen this. And the Buddhas praised Ananda for the question. And their answer was that the 6 sense organs are the roots of birth and death, but they're also the means to attain liberation.
Mm. So that's just the uh, unique of Buddhism, right? They say that as much as we know how to transform them, we'll be fine. One thing is, if we don't know, it's short of sufferance, but the same things, as much as we have the wisdom, we can see them in parts the way it would be the happiness. Uh, so let's say mm, let's say for example mm, if mm, if we hear, let's say if we have a happy mind, if we hear the sound of the bird chirping, so we really enjoy that, right? We enjoy the sound of the bird chirping. So if we have the disturbed mind, confused mind, uh, angry mind, the sound of the bird chirping, it may aggravate more of our anger too.
Mm-hmm.
So again, depending on our state of mind, and also, or let's say put this way, uh, when you heard the story about the monk, two monks, the master and the student, walking through the field, uh, and somehow the student looked up to the sky and saw um, uh, the birds flying overhead. So the student pointed finger to the sky and said, "Oh, master, there's beautiful birds flying now." So what happened? The master turned around and used his hand to pour the student nose hardly. You know that story? Yeah.
We heard that one before.
And the student cried. But so when they got back to the monastery, so the student cried and laughed at the same times. So the student asked, "What's going on? Why you were crying and laughing at the same time?" And he explained, "Well, because my master pulled my nose hardly. That's why it's so painful. That's why I'm crying. And also on the top of that, I'm laughing because I recognize my master teaching. The same event, seeing the flock of birds, right? It's a
Mm-hmm.
sun there. The master pulled the nose to remind the student, "Well, look in, don't look up there." Hmm. Yeah. So before we move on, what do you think about what I say here? The sixth sense organs are the one that ties down here, and also the sixth sense organ are the one that may enable us to realize the permanent. Before we move on, what do you think about this?
So it's a it's a difficult thing to understand, and it makes me think of something that, like, it's very similar to something I understand very well in my work. When someone has an injury, the body during the injury sets up a response to absorb the force.
Hmm.
And after the injury, that response gets stuck if it's a strong force. So when I'm feeling for the flow through the body, when there are these injuries, they'll have created a sort of imprint, where some tissues are denser, there's more tension, there's less flow that goes through there. And I could say that, okay, that is the cause of their problem. That's the cause of their pain. In the same way that we could say the six sense organs are the cause of this, of birth and death. But the way that I treat it is recognizing that within it is also the solution. So I don't resist what it's trying to do, but work with the latent tensions and forces there. And when they come to their point of neutral, where they've achieved the position they're trying to achieve,
Hmm.
then flow returns. And the part that was dense, it was just it was just the flow, but in an adapted state.
Hmm.
And once it's able to return to its balanced tension, the flow returns, and then the body will release some degree of that asymmetric holding and come back to a more neutral position. Um, so I think it seems similar with, like, the senses, because we're not supposed to deny them or try to get away from them, but we're also not supposed to, like, pursue the sense data, but, like, by being aware of them and, like, letting them come to balance on their own without the kind of distinguishing mind continually directing towards what they're sensing, but, like, like allowing that to settle, and then, the nature of that sensing becoming more, like, it's like it becomes illuminated. I think when I sit to meditate, physically my body may initially, there may be some discomforts, but as I kind of notice the feeling and let it be okay, well, that tension dissipates and flow increases, and then gradually just the sensing of feeling becomes pleasant of itself, like, without me going any, like, doing anything or having anything touch me, or having, just the act of sensing itself is pleasant and it's neutral phenomena. um, so I think I, maybe have some understanding of that if I take a moment with it, but initially it seems difficult to understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Uh, Again, the sense is that, remember, above there, the Buddha mentioned that we chase after the sound, right? Like the hearing. We don't recognize the hearing, but we chase after the sound. That's why we tied out here. As long as we don't chase after the sound, we recognize the hearing. That's what is about liberation here. When people make comment about ourselves, whether it's good or bad, whether pleasant or unpleasant, whether they score us or praise us, most of the time, we can say 99%, if we don't know how to recognize them, there'll be the disturbance, right? Whether they praise us, right? They put high head on us, or they score us or praise us in a negative way. We feel bad, we feel sad. That's just through our ears. That's the sixth sense organ. This is the disturbance there. That's the mental affliction there through the ears. But on our way, as well as we just recognize, oh, okay, whether they praise us or whether they put us down or slander us or increase us, it is a sound. That's the way we can transform the suffering into happiness. As long as we stay with the sound alone. Usually, I would remind these Buddhists that whichever food you offer to the monks, we accept that. It helps to pardon. They used to come to the temple and ask whether we like this kind of food or like that kind of food and so forth. So as food, just food, whichever thing you offer, that's okay. We can accept. That's a bit different, right? Between the common notion of indicating, oh, this is delicious food and so forth, and the tasting nature, just food. As much as we consume it and we swallow through the throat, we would not feel any taste anymore, whether it's good or bad, as much as they are eatable. So that's what it's about. Here, the six sense organ are the one that ties out here, and so through them will be liberated if we recognize their nature. And although Ananda had heard these Dhamma voices, he was still not clear about their profound meanings. So he bowed and asked Buddha, how can the same six organs cause me to transmigrate in the samsara and be happy in absolute nirvana? A common question, right? Yeah, please.
The Buddha said, Ananda, both organs and their objects spring from the same source. Bondage and liberation are not two different things. Consciousness is illusory like a flower in the sky. Ananda, your knowing originates from each phenomena which takes on form because of your sense organs. Both form and seeing are mutually dependent. Like two bundles of rushes that stand by leaning against each other. Therefore, if your intellect acts as the knower, this is the root of your ignorance. If it is free from seeing, it will be nirvana, which is transcendental and pure. How then can the latter allow foreign elements to intrude? So interesting, like there's a little bit of, like I could see the distinctions the Buddha is making here. We look back at previous section, like just the earlier section about the hearing nature being independent of the sound. And then here, it's talking about how form and seeing are mutually dependent. So for seeing, you need form. So there's like another layer upon that. We don't distinguish seeing without form. And just like, so we can hear the bell, and then we know we can distinguish silence because there was the sound of the bell before. If there was only silence, we probably would never distinguish silence because there wasn't anything to distinguish it through. And so there'd be no hearing. But earlier the Buddha says the hearing nature is not dependent upon the sound. But here, in a way, it's like it's not the nature that's dependent upon it, but the distinction of hearing or the distinction of seeing, like the phenomena that we describe as seeing or hearing, but the nature which allows those to occur. So it's not contradictory, but I could see it like initially appearing contradictory, like Ananda has brought up questions in response to what the Buddha said, where something seems to contradict something else, but it doesn't really. It's just like a subtlety or a nuance of it. So therefore, if your intellect acts as the knower, so then that's like the like identifying an identification with the intellect, and that's the root of ignorance. But if it's free from seeing, it will be nirvana. So if it's free from seeing, like, so the intellect is not the knower, or is not the seer, is not conceptualized as a thing, then it'll be nirvana and transcendental and pure. I mean that makes sense. If we don't identify and we like don't grasp onto a phenomena and don't say, oh, I, like bring the I into it, and that even consciousness is illusory, like consciousness, and it's an idea that we come up with to explain this experience.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. So, of course, like you say, at first it seems contradictory, right? But here the Buddha is mentioned about if we see in the conventional way, right? The bondage and liberation are not different, right? They both form and sin are mutual independent. So in that what we call conventional views, right? But when we talk about absolute view, you let go of that, even that thought. So that's why if your intellect act as a knower, this is the root of your ignorance. If we analyze, oh, this is the sound, this is the hearing, that's a source of or the root of ignorance. Because we keep playing around with our analytical thinking, and then let that kind of thought come in, so that we can recognize the pure nature. Just like we continue to disturb the muddy water. Yeah. Okay. So to repeat his instruction, the Buddha read the following gatha. True nature is free from all phenomena, which are illusions by causes created. Phenomena neither rise nor fall with all. Phenomena are the flowers in the sky. The unreal reveals the real, but both are but illusion. Since there is nothing real nor unreal, how can there be subject and object? For between the two, there is no true nature alike. So again, the true nature go beyond all phenomena or phenomena. So if we recognize as we would live with the true nature. Otherwise, we just play around with subject and object with duality. Hmm. This one is not much difficult to understand, right?
Well,
Especially,
no,
especially
not. I think it's understandable.
yeah, please.
Um, it's the point where two rush bundles meet when set up right. Tying and untying from the same cause arise, while the saintly and the worldly are not dual. Consider underlying nature at the point of meeting where both is and is not, cannot be. If you disregard it, you are in delusion. If you awaken to it, you are free at once. 6 knots are untied one after the other. When 6 are undone, one vanishes as well. Choose an organ that is all penetrating to enter the holy stream and attain Bodhi. Old habits flow like torrents in Alaya's subtle consciousness.
Hmm.
So tying and untying arise from the same cause arise. So tying, the Buddha talked about the senses being the cause of birth and death, but also the cause of liberation. So in that case, tying and untying both from the senses, while the saintly and the worldly are not dual. So those exist as a pair, and you can't define one without having the example of the other, so that those apparent dualities are actually in at their root are one. And this is what it's saying: consider the underlying nature at the point of meeting. So where there can't be distinction of is and is not, it cannot be. Um, if you disregard it, you're in delusion. So if we only think that the dualistic things are real, then we're in delusion of the nature of duality, the true nature of duality. But if we awaken to it, we're free. And the 6 knots are the senses; they're tied one after the other. And when they're all undone, one vanishes as well. So in yeah, I'm pretty sure the verses from Jingming's Affirming Faith and Mind, they follow the Surangama very closely as I'm learning this, because they say there's a line in it where it goes, well, even that one mind disappears. So from it talks about from one mind comes duality, but cling not even to this one. I'd have to start at the beginning to place it correctly, but it's basically the idea that even oneness is an illusion, because when there's oneness, it requires the dualistic concept. So all concept has to fall away. But as we're talking about concepts, it's like, you know, how do you mention a concept that's within duality and try to point at non-duality? And that's kind of what has been happening with Ananda again and again. Is it's like he keeps seeing the concept very clearly, and that idea of pointing at the moon, like not necessarily getting that it's pointing outside of concepts or beneath them. And then choose an organ that's all penetrating to enter the holy stream of Bodhi. That the Buddha talked about earlier, like using one of the senses. And yeah, habits. Um, I can set my mind upon mindfulness, like in meditation, but then some habitual thought will come in about something that I'm engaged with during the day on a regular basis, about work or whatever, and it'll just kind of, without a choice, it feels like I'll be off on those habits. So that returning, that mindfulness and returning to um, maybe abandoning pursuing distinctions
Mhm.
is important.
Hmm. Hmm. So let's say up to here, what do you think is is practical or is too much for us to put in practice in our daily life?
I mean, if it's applied regularly, I think it's really helpful
Mm-hmm.
because all of our problems come from attaching to things that are out of our control. And I think the Buddha simplifies it in saying that, we're pursuing forms where, since we have all the six senses coming together and we have the mind coming together too, it's reinforced, like the compelling, like reality, apparent reality of it's reinforced by those different dimensions, all the senses and the thinking, the story that we're immersed in, that we've born into, lived our whole life. And so when we follow that, frequently we can be brought to a point where the situation is just totally unsatisfactory.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everyone is at some point, like, even if it's just those four unavoidable sufferings of birth, death, sickness, old age, um, not to mention all the other ones. So how do we actually effectively, in the moment that we're suffering, detangle ourselves from that? Well, if we can recognize that we were um, pursuing a delusion, that we were seeking these forms, basing our happiness and putting all the value on these things that are not primary, these things that come and go and that are secondary. And if we can simply turn towards that, like, what is aware of this, of what is it that hears, or what is it that experiences this, then there's this doorway out of that suffering that doesn't rely upon that story about attaining something or getting somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
It can't be obstructed, except by our thinking that we need to acquire some particular form or avoid some particular form.
Yeah, in the practical sense, nowadays, let's say, um, even us, right, too, before we go to any business office, we may look at the comment from those clients, patients, or people who have went there before. If this puts all kind of negative comments, it may affect our decision to go there, and vice versa. If we read so many good comments about their services and so forth, we love to go there. So do we. Let's say somehow people drop some comments about our monastery temple in the past, we will be happy, and vice versa. We will be sad if they put some negative ways, negative comments. So I'm talking about in the practical sense, in the religious sense, especially during this modern age. How could we go beyond that? We still affect with this type of good comment, bad comment, uh, and so forth in our daily life. How could we
Well, like your example of taking, say, sound and saying, even if these are negative words, it's just sound. So things you read written down, you could say, okay, those are just forms. And I think what it's doing is that it's acknowledging that the whole thing, the whole, like, the reality that we build up, it's based upon these notions of dualism. Like, language itself is based upon this duality that ultimately is illusion.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're experiencing the suffering over language, in this case, something someone says, and it's or we're experiencing the pleasure of language, we are bought into the reality of the meaning. Like, we are engaged in the system. And when we hit suffering, it's an opportunity to remind ourselves of because we're much more likely to want to remind ourselves when we're suffering than when we're really enjoying ourselves. So suffering is a good opportunity to recognize that it's built off this illusory duality, and that if we simply go to what is, as opposed to think about, the meaning and the person and try to analyze the situation. But if we stay with what is, well, then those thoughts they're only going to stay if we pursue them. There may be a functional reason to try to stay with it, though. Like, all right, if there's something someone says and more than one person has said it, and it's going to influence people coming back, and then I won't be able to help people. All right, well, maybe I need to address this thing that people are complaining about. And from a place of compassion, where I think that's where there's that middle way component, where we're not just saying, all right, no matter whatever people say, like my wife criticizes me for not doing the dishes, it's just sound. I don't have to do the dishes. It's like, well, it's just sound and I don't need to react. But, also maybe I do need to do the dishes. But I don't need to be concerned about, you know, the identity part of it, like my identity being threatened. Because if I think like the being present to the sound is sound also helps us to not solidify into the ego position, but to stay more fluid and to be able to also hear the rising of the meaning, because the Buddha lists this, the mind is one of the sense organs. So the arising of concepts could be synonymous to like a sound occurring. Like a thought is another phenomena that we kind of like, we have the idea that we control it, but at the same time we can't really describe ourself that controls it, or or how it controls it too. So if we can recognize those thoughts of judgment as phenomena as well, or sadness, or the feelings or emotion, and like stay with them and let them be okay until they settle, well, then we can still have the option to navigate the situation responsibly and like address if there's a concern, assess, okay, is this person coming from a place that can be helpful to my, like, to compassion, to helping people, or are they hurting and they kind of need someone else to hurt, and it's not something that really needs to be changed with the business or the temple. So I really do think it's very practical, because it can help us not be reactive and to go down a path that's ultimately not helpful for our goals.
Yeah. Here, let me show you what you call this. I'm sorry. This what they call grade my professor, and
Okay.
some of my students they look at this grading first before they register to my class. And you see that the two students, number one.
The two waffles.
The point is that it's sometimes, let's say, in the personal level, we can move on, but it may affect to our, let's say, teaching, or to, let's say, to your business. It's serious, right?
Yeah.
You don't
It's
like.
a little easier for me, I think, than you, because students, my experience, on average, students just love to complain. And so, but people who review, people are usually only going to review if something's really bad. Um, and if it's good or great, then they'll review as well. But they won't kind of review if it was like, just not so good, you know.
Okay. Of course, the college student is still immature. So sometimes they have the kind of bias, and they say something that they cannot control themselves. So my point is that, again, in the personal level, yeah, it may not affect to us much, but in the level of teaching career, business matter, or I mean that and this is a survival mode. It's pretty serious, right? So my question, how could we move beyond that? If we talk about survival mode that people criticize us so bad that no one want to come to see us.
Well, I think that's a real test of faith and mind, where, big mind, if we say that everything is one beyond the point of oneness, and we are being sincere, like we are really, we're not being lazy, we're not being careless, we're being sincere in our efforts, then we notice the phenomena, we notice what it is, and simply continue, like the monk who, or the master who accepted the child from that young woman, where he had nothing to do with it, but it was the way forward for him because it was compassionate for her. I think that's like, and that destroyed his life for many years, because right, people stopped giving him food. He didn't live nearly as comfortably, but he wasn't concerned about those things. He hadn't become attached to them, so he was able to simply, be present with what is.
Yeah, you know the story that uh okay, here, let me share with you this one here. Some professor they were laid off because the student complained. Let's see here. Anyway, I forgot. Let's see here. Uh, yeah, one famous, I think from New Jersey. I forgot the name. From New Jersey, I forgot the name of the school. So he give harsh tests on them, and more than 80. No, no, sorry, 80. His class is pretty big, and so around, I think around 80% of the student in his class complain. So the school let him out
Wow.
because it's so hard. Basically, he gave them harsh tests to pass.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about when we deal with survival skill and the survival way of life, how could we go beyond that? Of course, for us as Buddhists, we understand how to manage our compassion, our anger, and so forth. But when we talk about this type of nature, the pure nature, and so forth, and if people come back and say, well, what happened if they criticize me so bad that no one want to come to my business? How could I go beyond that? How could I let go of that? I'll be
Well, it's potentially in a sense, a radical teaching if we apply it fully, because there's acceptance of what is. And we can still be practical about trying to remedy the situation where, okay, I need to get more good reviews then. So what are the things that I need to do to get good reviews? And then getting to work. And, if you got 5 bad reviews, but you have 100 good reviews, it's like, well, everybody understands that some people just want to write a bad review, like no matter what. So I think initially, I think we need to disentangle from the reaction to the event, and so that we can be more effective in like seeing things clearly and plotting a way forward. Because the reaction can usually like get in the way, and like, so one thing, I had a guy give me a 2-star review because he wanted to see a female nurse practitioner, and we had on our website that that's what Lisa did, but Lisa decided she didn't want to do primary care anymore. And so then we had to tell him, okay, we don't have that service. So he went on and said 2 stars because their website doesn't represent the services they have. And so it's tempting to then go on and respond something back that's negative. But then people who go in and read that review see his bad one and then see a negative response. Well, now it's even worse. Mm-hmm. But if I can not take it personally, if I can recognize those things and recognize my own feelings about it, and first give, allow those to just be as they are and not be driven by them, then when I go in and I write my response, I can write a response that's calm, that's understanding, that like requests information on how to improve. So when people read that review, they can go down and see my response and they can be like, he doesn't seem unreasonable. Mm-hmm. And then just having work out in the community of demonstration of like, well, what is my vibe? What am I about? Having, YouTube videos and all of these things that people can refer to. There, so long as there's more data saying that like positivity than there is negativity, like much more, then I think people will kind of get it. Like there's always going to be bad reviews.
Yeah, that's why one more times, and that's why I got two. I'm sorry, I got yeah, two number one and 19 number five.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty good percentage.
Yeah,
That's good, good, great, awesome. That's 27 versus 2 awful. I mean the percentage on that's I don't want to do that. The math, it'll take a little bit of math right now.
that's point. That's point. Yeah, that's like you say that they're common. I mean, whether it's just positive, negative, especially the negative one, this is one of the reminding, right, for us to be careful, to correct our mistake, and so forth. This is be uh, helpful for us. Yeah. Anyway, so that's great, and thank you. That I just want to talk about how we explain for other people if they have this type of problems to more go beyond those kind of problems. Okay, we can stop here today.